All right, cool. Thanks, everyone. I'll do a small intro again. This is a big picture meeting to talk about outreach. This is our usual bi-weekly outreach meeting, but we're thinking about what are our goals here? Who are our audiences? Kind of zooming out and then getting into some strategies for how to reach those audiences, how to reach our goals. So the way we're going to work it today is I'll be facilitating and trying to take stacks so we hear voices from everyone in the so-called room. Just say something there in group chat or raise your hand. I'll keep an eye on it and try to keep the conversation flowing in nice and fair ways. We have a notes document that I think maybe if someone could share the link here in the chat, that might be most helpful in case folks aren't in Gitter or the other places. The notes doc it's a collective effort. So whoever can type in notes when you're not talking, very welcome. And I think folks just kind of figure out where in the document to type this stuff. We have an agenda up at the top that we just set. And it's 12:03. We've kind of had the same group of us here for a few minutes now. I'm not sure if we should wait a little longer or if anyone knows of other folks who definitely plan to be here who are not yet.
Surprised that Klonos isn't here yet, but I don't know for sure he can make it.
Yeah, that's who I had in mind. I was like, he's not here. Well, maybe let's get started then, since this material can definitely fill up a whole hour. We'll get started with a go around so that we can actually hear from everyone. What brought you to this meeting? Kind of what's the biggest burning question or thing you'd like to do or concern you have about outreach for the Backdrop project? And I am going to call folks in order of their windows in my Brady Bunch arrangement here. So I will go with Nate first.
I admit I'm not prepared to really put out there any formal ideas. I'm really just here to to listen. And so I'm hoping that other people have other ideas that that I can help facilitate. That's it.
Awesome. Next up, Tim.
I'm here because I'm a developer and I'm not good at thinking about things like outreach, and I don't know what I don't know. And I feel like there are probably a lot of good people in our community who are much better at this than I am. And I am really looking forward to hearing recommendations from everyone else.
Cool. Thanks, Jen.
Sure. I can go next. I've been active. I'm getting better from a dev perspective, but I've always thought I have more to offer the Backdrop community in terms of organizing and things like outreach and such. So I've made a point to attend these meetings as often as I can. And I'm just really looking forward to the opportunity to step back and look at some of the bigger picture. We often focus on, you know, the sign. Did we get the sign made? Did we do X or Y this week? But to sort of step back and say, what are we not doing? Who's our audience? I'm really interested in that discussion.
How about Joseph?
I guess I usually come to the outreach meetings more just to hear what other people have to say also, because, you know, I'm a back-end developer, so I don't know. I'm interested in outreach stuff because, like, the more Backdrop sites there are, the easier it is for like us to pay for development time. So yeah, I don't know.
Cool. Thank you, Joseph. And welcome, Greg. We're just doing a go around to hear kind of what brought everyone to this big picture outreach meeting today. So we've heard from a few folks, and let's go with Pete. I think Peter, BW Panda. I'll use handles.
So for me, I'm just sort of like Nate and some others, just like to attend these meetings just to watch and listen. But since this is an outreach meeting, it's interesting because literally this morning I was talking to one of my clients trying to convince them to move from Drupal 7 to Backdrop, and they had some concerns which I was trying to address. So I guess, yeah, just trying to learn how better to market Backdrop since I'm a developer. I spend all my time in an editor. I'm not good at marketing or that sort of thing. So yeah, from that point of view, I guess.
Totally. Thank you. Up next on my screen is Luke.
All right. Hey, yeah. Well, I like to come to outreach meetings because this is one of the places in the project where I feel like I actually have something I could at least theoretically offer. I've trained in business and I've studied marketing and would love to sort of be able to feed whatever's useful from that into the mission, particularly in terms of I'm more of an inbound marketer, so I'm all about product requirements and product definition kind of things. But I also know my way around promotion to some extent. So to the extent that that I can help in any way to sort of like take vague ideas and tell you what the industry buzzwords for those things are, and some things that work, or at least theoretically work, that we could try. I'm happy to be a part of that.
Thanks, Luke. Next is Jeff.
Hello. Yeah, I'm here to absorb and hear you guys' opinions. I'm interested in more clearly defining our market, if possible, to help guide our decisions.
Awesome. Thank you. Matthias?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, good to see you. It's my first meeting with Backdrop community ever. I use Backdrop for quite some time now, and I really love Backdrop. And I have to go for the next 2 years to migrate a lot of Drupal 7 sites, hopefully to Backdrop. From my professional background, I'm a marketer / copywriter, and in the German market, I'm from Zurich, Switzerland, and yeah, I'm curious to learn and to maybe, hopefully, to contribute.
Wonderful, and welcome. Thanks for making the meeting.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we heard you. Yeah, we're good. Cool. And next up is Greg.
Hi. So yeah, my name is Greg. I'm currently residing in Australia. I don't have any commercial sort of like goals, personal commercial value from Backdrop, because that's not my profession. And it hasn't been the case, even like I've been using Drupal for many years. I'm more of an enthusiast of the product. I've been using Drupal 7 and Backdrop for many years, but as a sort of like UX UI designer or advocate, I would say, for better user experience. I find it hard to sort of like convince even the local people in Australia, Melbourne, where I reside, to sort of like join even meetings to present Backdrop. So yeah, I'm here to see what I can do better to sort of like attract people here, but in general, if I can help others do the same in other places, that'd be great.
Awesome, thanks. And that was everyone on the call right now. So thanks for sharing all the thoughts. I think lots of us are here kind of with a similar thing. Like we know the software, we know development and website building, and we want to learn more about marketing and outreach and stuff like that. And luckily there's folks who are here who can share their skills in that area already. But I think the biggest thing I heard from folks is that we want to have a better sense of who we're trying to reach out to and how to convince them that this is really a viable thing. So let's dive into that question of the who. And I see some notes being typed into the pad already. And I would say, Jen, let's not put the notes there. I'd like to actually make sure we discuss them all with each other before just putting them in the notes so they don't get lost. So I see them down below, but I was thinking what we could do to start is actually brainstorm. Who are the audiences? Who are the people that we want or need to reach with our outreach? And let's do a brainstorming list first. Let's not like kind of dig into each one. We'll dig into them at the end of the list. But first, I'd just like to hear from folks like, who's an audience and kind of a brief, like, why are they our audience? I also realized I didn't share in the opening go around for myself. So I'll say, hey, I'm Jack. I am here because outreach for Backdrop is super important to me personally and professionally. Like other folks, trying to convince clients that Backdrop is a good thing to use. Clients who really trust me already and know me already, it's a little easier. Folks who are kind of coming in new, who are just prospecting, they're like, what is this Backdrop thing? So I think the biggest thing on my mind is how do we make it so folks don't have as many like, what is this Backdrop thing, skepticism and questions blocking them? So that's my sharing. But now let's talk about audiences. Who do we want to be reaching here? I have tons of ideas, but I know everyone else does. So let's see who has the first idea. Just throw it out. And we'll kind of do popcorn style. You don't have to do stack right now.
Yeah, I think that a major portion of the audience would be people that already have Drupal 7 sites and they're looking to migrate or looking for a solution because it's soon-ish becoming end of life.
Awesome, that's a big one. Who's another audience that folks can think of? Folks we want to reach about Backdrop.
I think as well, fresh blood, as in people that are either just graduated and they're getting into the web dev market, and they're sort of like examining what solutions are there and what could be something that they could work with as a tool. So it would be people that are fresh out of college, I guess, and going into the market.
Cool. All right. Let's hear from someone else. What's another audience?
So a possible audience. So because there's a little bit of debate on some prospective audiences, whether they are or not. I think one of the possible audiences is WordPress users. We often talk about that. And that's a very broad, so narrowing that I think would be helpful. But we often talk about whether or not we're, is our WordPress users our audience or not? And I'm not 100% sure. Certainly certain segments are, I think, but which ones?
Yeah, I wouldn't say the entire WordPress audience, but specifically the WordPress audience who've reached their limits with what they can do with WordPress and they're looking for something stronger, I guess, or yeah, like a framework.
All right. Well, I want to suggest an audience that's related to Drupal. I mean, I think all of us got here through Drupal, and something that I always felt was semi-served, but sort of not really by Drupal. That's sort of our potential, which is the person that wants a website of some sort that doesn't have, that's missing the resources that big companies have, that big organizations have to put in a website. Notably, besides the licensing costs, so some hacker can't get Adobe Experience Manager even if they wanted to. But then the other side comes around with, always been the case with Drupal, but is even more the case with Drupal 8 and 9 of the complexity. I think a lot of people end up in WordPress or Squarespace and things like that because that's the only possibility. And whereas Drupal ahead of us and now Backdrop have lots of things that people can get a handle on pretty quickly to do very sophisticated things, the multiple fields, the taxonomies, like nice sophisticated features like that. There's barriers to entry for those folks that I think we should look at minimizing somehow. So to bring that back around, the ambitious website wannabes with limited resources, whose ideas are more powerful than their budgets.
When you say resources, you're referring to budget, right?
I'm referring both to like actual money, like licensing stuff, and also to budget of time. If if you've got something that you really want, but you can't, you have a job and you can't afford to spend, your entire life learning how to do this thing, that kind of resource, something that can be successfully accomplished with a part-time commitment.
I really like what Luke said. I really like that. What I try to find out that this described it briefly in a blog post, as a first step, try to get the low-hanging fruits. And these are people like us. We already choose to use Backdrop, and I really love it. But at the same time, it's just a part of my work. It's kind of a commodity, you say. It simply has to work in 2020. A CMS has to work. And that's what I like about Backdrop. I really like the configuration management. It's just such a great tool. I still love views. When you use Drupal, it's just there, but try to show views to other people. They don't believe what views is, how powerful it is. Yeah. How powerful it is in a daily work and on a small agency, all things like that. And this is why I really love the concept of Drupal 7. I also do Drupal 8 from time to time, but most of my websites will go to Backdrop because of that.
Yep.
Ideas are bigger than what was said.
Since we're bullet pointing, I would like to say that, yes, you mentioned that small agencies should be a small digital agency should be a bullet point. And then the other thought that that was always at the back of my mind is that the Australian government here has chosen as the go-to solution and distribution based on Drupal for their government as a whole. And it started as a small platform, but everyone is sort of like being awarded at a big rate, pace. So here's a thought that has always been in my head. See how we said graduates? I would love it if Drupal was used, or Backdrop in this case was used as a tool to teach people, as in before they get out of school. So in my head, I've been advocating for this. It's like the Australian government is using Drupal, so Drupal should be taught at school. So you have an army of developers or site builders that come out of school ready to work for government on their sites. So yeah, here's an idea, students. Be it college students or even what you call it, those experimental schools that do some technology stuff.
So I put a blog post or another forum post out about sort of ambitious do-it-yourselfers, like where do they fit into our audience? Because like how much skill do you need to build your own Backdrop site? How much skill should you need? I feel like it's not clear to me if it is our audience yet, but I would like for our audience to be somebody who, I don't want to compete with Squarespace, that's not my point, but somebody who maybe has built their own HTML website before. They're not a professional web developer. They understand the basic concepts of web development. But maybe they're not fluent at CSS or something, right? But they want an ambitious site. They want to build it themselves. They're willing to spend the time watching videos and learning. But, we need to, be at the point where they can reasonably do that. So, I don't know, to sum that up, I guess I'd say sort of ambitious do-it-yourselfers. And maybe ambitious and also, with limited experience or skills, right? I don't expect somebody who's never done anything in the web to just pick up Backdrop and create a website. That's not realistic.
Cool. We're getting quite a list here. I want to ask folks, especially who haven't said anything, if you have any kind of ideas of audiences, and also thinking and looking about who we've talked about now, who is missing from this? So yeah, a few more minutes of brainstorm.
I have one thing. Sorry.
Go for it, Jen.
I have one thing from my list that didn't make it onto the top list, and that is people who've been using Drupal for a really long time. So this might fit in with Jeff's comment about people coming from Drupal 6, but not necessarily, it doesn't even really matter which version of Drupal it is, but it's people who love Drupal that might not be aware of how similar Backdrop is and both how different Backdrop is, like what's been improved, that have sort of a mental conception of what Backdrop is that might not be what it actually is. And I think that my reason for reaching them is because I think that they would love Backdrop if they did know those things. We aren't doing a very good job of communicating that.
I want to throw an extra angle in there in terms of market definition that I think we should bear in mind, because the coattailing on Drupal knowledge doesn't just apply to it doesn't just apply to people that were there at the time. I mean, there is at this point a tremendous amount of literature and resources to Drupal. So if we can make the connection that within Backdrop, this can be leveraged, that this kind of learning, these patterns are still valid or still useful, that can kind of open up, it can broaden our offering of what we're asking people to do beyond what we're able to create. We can say, look, you can reuse this other stuff too, and it's applicable.
Here's a stolen idea. There is a person in Queensland, if I recall correctly, who is working with people that are coming out of rehabilitation, and he's trying to get them back into the society by teaching them how to build a site and build a small business for themselves or others. So it could be either young children coming out of juvenile sort of like institutions, or it could be people that are unemployed. These will not be our direct audience as in buy-in. It would be the people that are have volunteered to teach them something so that they can get out of the difficult situations that they are in their lives.
Perfect example of limited resource audience, right? Like that's a very
so because choice. I remember that this person was saying that because people think that in their heads, especially from these situations in their lives, they think that they're trapped in a situation and it would take a lot for them to sort of like get into the market. And his goal is like in the first 30 minutes of the training sessions that he has, to just use Drupal to show them that like in 30 minutes they could set up a Drupal site with a few products and a payment gateway that works, and they get excited, and then they sort of like, I think that these are the audience that would get thrilled. It will be a life-changing opportunity for them, and they will join the community, and they would be able to sort of like, not able, but thrilled to be contributing, because they know from first hand that it is a product that changes lives. It's a good cause.
But maybe with those people you compete with every other beginner tool. That is my concern. If you take those people you're talking about and to teach them to build a website, and they go to another person, they go to a friend and see WordPress, there's a Wix, there's a Squarespace, they might not get what Drupal 7 or Backdrop is all about. Just my perspective. I learned to love the tool after understanding some requirements of complexity, which I didn't have at the beginning when I built my first website. But
you're saying
this is just my perspective.
Yeah.
So you're saying that we shouldn't be targeting beginners, but some intermediate level? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, I think I would interject and say, I think with all of these folks, there's going to be like pros and cons, or like things that'll work for those audiences and things that won't. I think for like lots of these, like that one that Greg just brought up, I know a training program here in Oakland. It's awesome. It's for youth. They teach them on Weebly. Why do they teach them on Weebly? Who knows, right? So like, there's going to always be other options. There's always going to be things like that. I think this exercise is just though to like get us kind of thinking like, who are the people who are out there? Even if there's going to be other competition, some of these audiences might not be the ones we want to focus on, right? Like they might not be the most fruitful ones, but I think it's good to have like, get a big sense of like what's on our minds. And I would actually say from here, maybe let's try to synthesize this a little bit. So we've named a bunch of different audiences, right? And I'm seeing some kind of some groupings here. So I'm going to throw them out to kind of structure the rest of our conversation. So a big group, an overarching one, is like end users. Like those are the people who have existing sites and need something to replace it. People who are wanting that ambitious website with limited resources for their organization or their company or their project. Those are the main, or, you know, like people with the sites, people who have the sites who are going to be the product owners in the end, who are going to be using the sites, things like that. That's a big overarching one. And then there's site builders, developers, the folks who are making sites. And in there, we've got a bunch of different categories, right? We have people who have been working with Drupal for years, and either they love where it was before and don't love where it's going and need to know that Backdrop's a good place for them to go. Maybe they've been working in Drupal for years and haven't loved it and don't know that Backdrop is a good place to go now because it's different. There's folks who are working with tools like WordPress and maybe even other small site building tools like Squarespace and Weebly, who uses that, but whatever. Those kind of folks who are reaching the limits of the software they're already using and might have something, Backdrop might really be good for them. So we're kind of seeing the students. Then there's like this other category of like potential site builders, like folks, and those kind of overlap, right? But like folks who are students, who are learning skills now, who are in computer science programs and are choosing what languages and what frameworks and whatever to use. So that's kind of the layout that I'm seeing of like the different categories. And we could think about these because lots of the tactics that we use to reach people in these groups, it's helpful to group them together because the tactics can reach multiple groups at once. So that's kind of where I'm thinking, like, does that sound like a good construction? We have like end users, eventual product owners, site owners, big category, and then the people who build the sites broken down into many of these smaller categories that we mentioned. These are the different audiences. Does that sound like a decent, it helps me to group them a little. So I would ask, oh yeah, go
Can
for
I
it.
add one more thing?
Yeah, please.
It didn't come up before, but we're talking about outreach for the product. And there's also, and I wonder to what extent we should be thinking about a sort of outreach for the community, which is sort of like contributors. Like some people, we have some people in this group that really contribute to Drupal or Backdrop, but don't really use it. And that might be a different kind of a category, like people that just want to be involved, but aren't necessarily building their own site.
Jen has added a category there in the big ones, the big groups, that says learners, students, hobbyists. So that would go there, I guess. Right?
I mean, that one, yeah, we can probably put lots of these individual audiences in multiple categories too. But yeah, no, I like these big groups. I like the addition of that learners one. So we can keep these groups in mind as we move into the next part of the conversation, which is, well, let's start with the positive. What are we doing to reach those groups right now? And what are we doing that we think is working? Let's start there. So I encourage folks to kind of look at the list and like of audiences and then say, okay, how are we reaching out to those folks? Any ideas that come to mind? I will start out with one that I think we have reached out a lot to existing Drupal site builders and developers. I see it all the time at the events. There's been talks at Drupal camps and cons and stuff for years and years. And we have a presence there already. So I think that's an audience that we've reached out a lot to. We could probably reach out more to, but I think that might be one of the ones that's like that we've made the biggest efforts towards. So I don't know. I'm trying to think of stuff ways besides events that we reach out to them though.
I think we've been fairly active on Twitter. I say as somebody who helps with the Twitter account. I don't know if it's effective, but my idea is that is potentially reaching both a current Drupal audience, but also a larger. It has the potential to reach a larger audience. I don't know if we're doing as good a job as we could be, or if it's working. But it's a channel that we've been using actively. I think we put a substantial amount of time into Twitter. I view our forums as an outreach tool. That and it combined with Twitter, for example, one of the things I try to do is retweet discussions going on in the forum, whether they're how do I sell Backdrop to how do I fix a certain problem. And so I definitely view the forum as an outreach tool. Again, I don't, and also, I believe anything we get on the internet that people can find when they're searching for solutions is outreach, right? Because if you're trying to solve a problem and you're Googling that problem and Backdrop content comes up, that's important. And I think that's how we all solve a lot of our problems in terms of web development, right? Is we just go out Googling a problem. So anything we get, blog posts, forum posts, these are all also outreach.
I'm going to try to guide this a little. So for the different ways we've named already, I want to see like what audiences do we think we're actually reaching with those. So like I saw like at the top of the list, there's events, but there it was like, I feel like we're really at a lot of Drupal events and not so much at other events so far, right? So like, let's talk about for each of these, who do we think we're reaching and who do, you know, like, well, who do we think we're reaching with those? Because then we're going to start seeing like, who are we not reaching with any of these things we're doing? So Drupal events, we're mostly reaching an existing Drupal audience or people who might be interested in Drupal already, but open to hearing something else. Social media, what audiences that we identified above, who do we think we're reaching with that? Yeah.
Oh, Jack, can I step back to the events? Because I think Jen has done a couple of non-Drupal events, and I've done 2 totally non-Drupal events in the Twin Cities talking about Backdrop. So I just want to make sure we acknowledge that we are doing a little bit, not enough, but it's happening. In terms of Twitter, I think that we're probably mostly reaching also Drupal users because I think that that's who is probably mostly following us, but we're also because it's Twitter, it's public. So it has that potential overreach into other communities, which is, I think, a good thing, but I don't know if it's effective at doing that.
So I want to suggest something. I was looking at the list of the general big groups that we identified before, the end users, site owners, was builders, changed now to website architects and stuff, and learners. I think in terms of where our messaging is going, I'll just throw out that I think we're almost entirely focused on the site builders out of those 4 groups, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. But if we are doing that, I think it might make sense to subdivide that a little bit. And I just want to throw out like the categorization. You can take it or leave it. But it strikes me that within the pool of people that are constructing websites, there's obviously the programmers first and foremost. We're very familiar with that. There's information architects, which are called site builders within the Drupal world, and there's also I mean there's at least 2 pieces that I think are kind of underserved within Drupal and particularly within Backdrop. One being artists. Outsiders think of websites being very, very visual things, but we don't do any. We don't try, I don't think, unless I'm mistaken, to actually get in touch with people that don't know programming at all, but just know what visual presentation looks like. And I think that might be a missing piece. And similar, the last group that I identified, I'm not saying it's the only possibility, but I identified marketers. And I don't mean specifically, people wearing sport coats, passing out business cards, things like that. They're just people that have a product and want to move. I guess that's really end users in this thing. So we had already covered that. So boiling back, the one thing identified is artists. I think maybe artists should be a group that are underserved that we should try to connect with.
I often say at work because we value or we aim to contribute more to Drupal. And each time that the discussion comes up, everyone mentions developers. but there are project managers that can contribute, which are sort of like excluded from the list, as in no one mentions them at all, so they think that they cannot contribute. Each time that contribution is mentioned to them, they just pass the ball to developers. Whereas we have the issue queues, like both in Drupal and in Backdrop. And project managers can help us triage and see through, like be advocates, sort of like the equivalent of advocates that we have. I'm not sure in which of the big groups that we identified before the project managers feed.
Yeah, as a frequent PM myself, I kind of see like both PMs and even to a certain degree artists and designers like fitting into the category of like folks who produce websites. So like whether it's the salespeople at those agencies or the project managers or the designers or things like that. Now, artists might also be a bit of a separate field from that, but I think that when we're thinking about let's get beyond just devs. Now we probably have to focus in on each of these small categories, of course, but I think Luke is right. Like in that web architects group, there's a lot of smaller audiences, a lot of them PMs, et cetera, that we could target in more specific ways. Yeah.
I love the idea of trying to figure out project managers because it's hard, right? Like it's hard for someone to imagine being in that role without being the boss, and you're not going to be the boss of people who have done all the work, right? So trying to find a way to harness, organizational ability in a way that doesn't require someone to feel like they have to be able to take control of things. I don't know if that's possible. I mean, I think it's a difficult problem to solve, but it might be something to think about.
Yeah. So for the people that are not monitoring the agenda, we just sort of like change the category from website architects to website professionals, and we included solution architects, project managers, and designers in that group.
Awesome. Cool. So going back to so what are we doing now and who are we actually reaching with it? Forums and blog posts were also mentioned. Who do we think we're reaching with the forums right now, the audiences?
Fortunately, it seems like the people most likely to use the forums are the ones that are using our software. And so they're the ones that have questions or problems. So if they're on the forums, they're a great candidate because they basically are already using Backdrop. That's the biggest hurdle. Like literally we say in all of our classes, the hardest thing is getting people to use it in the first place. As soon as they use it, then they're like, oh, wow, like this is fast and simple, and lots of superlatives come out of their mouths once they've actually used it, which is great. So yeah, I think existing users tend to be our target for the users of the forums.
It's not only people using it, I guess people evaluating it, like considering it, because we do get questions in the forum that are, yeah, I'm looking into that. But what about security, for example? What about,
I would agree. And I think, Nate, you're right that 90% of the value probably goes to people using Backdrop already, but there is value to a broader audience. It's also because it provides us content we can tweet about and share in other ways. It sort of, I think as Gregory says, people who are evaluating or making decisions might end up in the forum, as they're evaluating it and get good information. So yeah, I think most of the forum's value is to existing users, but I think it has value to broader audiences. And we can't forget that.
I guess adding to that too, searchers, like people, just Googlers, the forums come up more highly than the GitHub issue queue. I think that's just because of the nature of being on backdropcms.org instead of GitHub.
So I'm sure folks can kind of see how even just talking about this, it gives us ideas about, oh, how are people getting there? How do we have to pay attention to these things? It stresses to me what folks in the community have been endorsing. Pay attention to the forums. Like lots of people are getting a chance, their first taste of Backdrop through that. So yeah. How else? Oh, blog posts. Who are we effectively reaching right now, or who do we think we are reaching with our blog posts so far of the audiences we've identified? Some of these might be repeating stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, I think existing audience is being reached, like people that subscribe to b.org are people that are already interested in the product. So you have two kinds of, in my opinion, two kinds of people there. The people that are part of the community already and they're using the product, so they're interested to see what's up, what's changing, what's coming up. And then you have people that are being skeptical, but are keeping sort of like an open mind and keeping an eye on the community, which want to see how active we are. And
I feel like blog posts serve the same audiences as the forum in the same kind of way, in that it isn't, I don't know. If this is like, there's different stages of outreach, right? There's outreach to people who've never heard of us before. There's outreach to people who've heard about us or evaluating us. And there's also outreach to people who've started to use Backdrop but aren't committed yet, right? And I think the blog serves a lot, maybe not to get absolute people who've never heard about us, but it certainly serves that evaluating who are thinking about it. A big objection people have to Backdrop is that, oh, the community's too small, or, will it be there 2 years from now? And an active blog, showing things happening, an active forum, really help those people.
Now, are there other forms of outreach that we're already doing that aren't listed here? So we've got the events that we do, social media stuff, forums, blog posts. What other is there outreach that we're doing that we're missing here? We're not captured.
what we're doing now, exactly what Tim said. What we're doing now.
This year.
The
Gotcha.
meetings,
Meetings.
yeah.
Word. Say more, please. Either both or someone else even.
I wish that more people were participating. Like, we have a good sort of like amount of audience this time, but it's usually a little bit less people in this, especially this outreach or design meeting. And there's quite a few more during the dev meetings, but it would have been greater if it were more. In general, the channels should be whatever. I'm not concerned about the media, what specific media we use, but yeah, we should be sort of like doing more to sort of like bring new people and retain the existing ones. That's the main point.
In the chat, Jen has mentioned the newsletter, and Nate, did you have some things to add?
Yeah, newsletter was also something I was going to add. And adding on to the meetings, our YouTube channel records all of these things for posterity. That also is a fairly effective tool. I've heard some people actually listen to these meetings like podcasts, like they literally play it on their commute.
Yeah, on the way to work.
Yeah. And then our chat tools, which of course is slightly in flux right now, but yeah, Gitter, and what's the new one that we're Zulip that we're looking at?
It's not a fact. We're going to Zulip.
I mean, I would kind of caution with Gitter and Zulip, like, so lots of these things are communication tools. Are they necessarily outreach tools? And so there, it's like, I'm not sure. There are Gitter and Zulip especially, and also kind of the GitHub issue queues. Like they seem in the same place for me. Like they're important places for us to preserve interest, encourage interest, like they're good places to think about retention of people in community. Like, how do we keep these folks here? I don't know if they're necessarily the places where we outreach, where we're like actually reaching out to get those folks. So just sharing a thought there. Yeah.
I agree with regards to Gitter and Zulip, but evaluators look at project repos. They see when the last commit was there. They might check the profiles of the most frequent committers and see how many contributions they're doing over the years. They're sort of like, it's a way to measure the health of a project. At least that's what I do. And that's what I used to do in Drupalland as well. I would go into project page and see how many bugs are there, how many open issues, how many contributors, when was the last commit, when was the last release, things like that. And actually, when was the release before that? As in how many releases over a specific period of time? So yes, I agree for Gitter and Zulip is probably retention or communication tools, but GitHub is, for technical people at least, is a means of outreach. We could, if we could make things more attractive via the README file of the project, I guess.
I want to actually throw in something there because I feel like it's at the edge of our pondering here, but we haven't directly addressed it, which is scalability of the different channels. Because like it strikes me that Gitter and the Zoom meetings, like right here, this meeting right now, we couldn't really get much bigger than this. If we had 100% audience increase to this meeting, no one would get a chance to say anything. No one would be able to keep track of it. Like we're at about the limit of that. And I feel like Gitter and Zulip are sort of similar, that if there was more, like, you know, I don't have time to catch up the traffic as it is. If that increased, it would become unworkable. Whereas in contrast, like the forums have a kind of hierarchical structure built in, could grow to be 100 times as big and still work. In fact, would be better. So we might want to keep those in mind. You know, which approaches can scale if we get the kind of success we're looking for, and which ones become limiting.
Since we're mentioning the chats. Big W Panda has done a great job to get some statistics of, I just don't want this to get lost, some statistics of how many responses and how many comments each person had. So we had some people that are, if we show to people that the chat system that we have has always people there that we respond to them, they're not gonna have to wait for a day or hours to get a response. That is a good way to sort of like build confidence to people that we have an active community, and if you join the forum, the chat, chances are that someone's going to respond even instantly.
So we have 10 minutes left approximately for this meeting. And of course, there's been so much to talk about. We're not going to leave here with a solid outreach plan or something for what we want to do, right? But I think what we can leave here with is some good grounding for what we're doing in our future outreach meetings. Maybe the next one could be concretizing this some more into like strategies. But for the last 10 minutes, I'd like us to look at this because as we've been discussing who we're reaching with our current outreach, it has been very predominantly the website professionals or website producers for most of these. We're reaching folks who are working in Drupal. We're reaching folks who are evaluating software to use to build their websites. We might be reaching some evaluators who are more on the end user side, right? Through some of these things. But to me, it sounded like as we went through most of these things, we're mostly reaching website producers right now. So I'd like to end this with some thoughts about how we can start reaching some of those other groups more. The more of the end users. We have evaluators a little bit by the things we're using right now, but end users. And remember, our software is meant for small to medium-sized businesses, nonprofits, and what's the other, education, I believe. So how do we reach those end users more? Website, well, we already did website professionals, product site owners and learners. Maybe let's just do a brainstorm about like, we're not doing it now. What can we do to reach those folks?
I have a suggestion which kind of chains right in to that. It's we ask them. You know, we could definitely use a more effective sort of surveying technologies somewhere where when someone comes in, we can have it a structure of who we think they are. Like, you know, we're guessing you're in this group, this group, this group, this group. But like, if that doesn't apply to you, for God's sakes, who are you? And what can we do for you? Like we we currently, I don't think, have really any way to get answers that we're not looking for yet, right?
So would that be kind of like, where are you imagining like asking them, like how will we be asking these folks, or where? Yeah.
The most obvious thing would be on the website. Would be, you know, interested in Backdrop? Why? What did you think you were getting when you got here? You know, is it what it is or is it not? So, I think the website and that, you know, the like the CRM project we keep talking about would be part of that whole thing.
I think that one thing that evaluators sort of like look at the most is the amount of resources available, as in documentation and videos. It's a good thing that most of the things that we sort of like use or have respective like equivalents in Drupal. So most of the video tutorials out there apply because we have the same contrib modules, or if someone tries to do the same thing, they will find it very similar, like 95% similar. It might be a few changes, but still they will get their way around. But I would like to point out that there were at some point in the early years, maybe first or second year of Backdrop, we're 5 years old now, there were 2 books written by A Press. One is Beginning Backdrop CMS and the other one is Migrating from Drupal to Backdrop. And these books have been written like 3 years ago. So maybe it's time for a version 2 of these books. Like reach out to the authors of these books, and maybe they want to keep adding like the features, because if you, like in the 3 last years, we've had like how many, 9 releases with added features. Maybe these need to be showcased.
Are we in touch with Todd?
Sorry?
Didn't Todd Tomlinson write those 2 books?
I do not recall, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a popular medium that we've done a little bit with is podcasts. Jen, I think, actively went out and got some invitations to podcasts, some of them outside of probably our core market, although probably most of what we've done has been targeted at Drupal developers. But I believe there are other podcasts that we could probably, if we offered, that would reach other audiences that we could get on. And I don't know
can we have our own podcast? I'm sorry. Is technology to like make our meeting? People talk about listening to them in the car, and if I could subscribe to them in a podcast app, I would do that. Like I've wanted to do that endlessly. Like I'm curious how hard that is. Is that a switch we can throw somewhere somehow?
I think we should talk about that later, because that's a separate discussion, but it's a good one.
Yeah.
I got one last thing to say regarding, no matter if it's about beginners or professionals. I remember being in other software marketing projects, and whenever people are looking for a new solution, they have one thing in common: they have some kind of urgency. And this is why I'm a big fan of blog posts and forums and the classical inbound marketing. Remember when you chose another CMS, you have some kind of emergency. I kept Drupal 6 or 7 because I have the desperate need for a multilingual solution. And if I can live with a 80% solution, I live with it. I don't want to switch to CMS if it's not necessary. This might be, I don't know if it's the same in Backdrop, but urgency might be a big issue, which you can address with the appropriate content, maybe.
So for me, the audience of huge concern is those end users. You know, like people have heard of WordPress. Maybe some of them have heard of Drupal. They've heard more of Squarespace or things like this. It's been really hard trying to get folks to pay attention to Backdrop, like especially like clients we've been working with for like 10 years. Yeah, like they trust us, they go with what we say. But newer clients are really hesitant. Most of them are just deciding like, oh, we had Drupal. Okay, we're going to go with WordPress because we know of WordPress. So in terms of strategies for reaching those folks, I'm not sure. One thing I had mentioned to Jen is like trying to get a presence at other events that aren't the typical events at all. There's one called the Allied Media Conference over the summer in Detroit. That's mostly lots of artists, organizers, activists, like young folks, like lots of youth, people who are not, it's not really tech focused at all. So thinking about whether spaces like that have a lot of our target audiences in terms of like nonprofits, people in education and small businesses are at these events, trying to think about how to leverage those to get Backdrop into their heads so they're more open to it when they have to make a solution or make a decision about a solution. Yeah.
But nonprofit is a good market because of whoever does a nonprofit site does a pretty a site of a medium complexity. A nonprofit site is never like a lawyer's office. Here we are, address and an image of the team. That's why nonprofit could be a very good fit, or already is.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've heard a lot about
You're muted.
Square.
You're muted.
I'll stay quiet though, because BW Panda started talking. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Squarespace and Wix. Not because I'm looking for them, but just in general advertising on the web, be it Spotify ads, when I've had a free account that had ads, or like little advertising on side websites or whatever. So I've heard a lot about those through that sort of thing. Whether that's something you want to look at, I'm not sure, but that's from my point of view how I've heard about other systems and stuff.
Yeah, advertising. Yeah, I want to talk one thing. The flip of that is that advertising requires that we spend money. A group that we need to reach in the near future is donors, people that will give us money, because we've continued to dwindle our initial like cash funding that has sustained us for 5 years now, which has been pretty incredible that one campaign can last 5 years, but it has. And like I think that we have the opportunity to solicit people for money, just straight up. Because I think that there's a lot of believers out there, and there's a lot of people that want to contribute, and for a lot of people, that's the easiest way for them to do so, and I think they're willing.
Yeah, we should look into like GitHub sponsors or Patreon and those kinds of things.
Even just a traditional campaign, email. We've got the newsletter; it's got thousands of people on it, and we have the Software Freedom Conservancy, for which we've never launched a campaign saying, "Hey, if you donate to us, your donations are tax deductible," in the United States, at least, which is can be a strong motivator.
Yeah. Since we bring up the foundation, this has been a concern of mine for multiple years. So I would rather, I am a taxpayer, and I would like to have more control where my money goes. And if I can choose that my money goes to Backdrop, I would do that. So I live in Australia currently, and my question has always been, is it tax deductible at the end of the year? If we get the foundation to sort of like work that out for us and see, like, figure out what we need to do as Australians to sort of like channel some of our tax money towards Backdrop, then I would do it. But my efforts have not worked out this far.
So we're at the end of our time for the outreach meeting, and I want to respect the time for the dev meeting, I think, that comes next. So I think, though, what Nate brought up brings us to something that we didn't talk that much about, which is what we want all these audiences to actually do. So donating is something that we want them to do, right? But if we had infinite time and energy and could continue this conversation, I'd want us to think more about that. Like, what are the things we want from our audiences? And then kind of get into the nitty gritty of like, okay, what are the strategies and tactics we can use to reach the audiences we're not reaching that we want to reach, and then to get all the audiences to do the things that we'd like for them to do as a result of our outreach, right? We don't have limitless time and energy. So instead we might, I don't know what we want to do for the next outreach meeting. We might want to just move into more concrete, like, okay, like planning strategy stuff right away. But I hope that this puts us in a good place for continuing conversations. And I encourage folks to take what you listened to and read here and just bring it into the work we're doing with all these channels we already identified of outreach. Like, think about audiences that we're not reaching that much. How can we do a little bit different to reach those? How can we kind of up our game at reaching the audiences we already are reaching? So yeah, keep this stuff in mind, and hopefully this will be a good document for us to use going forward. Thanks y'all for participating in this experiment of a different way of doing this too.
Awesome.
Thank you, Jack. Great work.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, we're great. Good job, Jack.